The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Thick cream cardstock, embossed lettering, the kind of paper that costs more per sheet than my first apartment's weekly grocery budget. My mother's handwriting, or what used to be her handwriting before she hired a calligrapher for important correspondence, spelled out my name with surgical precision. Margaret Ann Coulter. Not Maggie, not Mags, the full baptismal name she'd given me 34 years ago, the name she'd used when she was still proud to claim me. You are cordially invited to a family celebration dinner, Saturday, October 14th, the Oak Room, 7 p.m., formal attire. No, love Mom. No, we've missed you. Just the details, arranged like a legal summons. I held the card for a long time, standing in the marble foyer of the house, no, the apartment, that I had bought 3 years ago. An apartment my mother had helped me find. An apartment she had moved into 6 months later, temporarily, after my father's death. An apartment she had never left. 3 years. 3 years since I'd stood in a real estate office in Queens, signing papers I didn't fully understand, trusting my mother because she was my mother, and mothers didn't steal from daughters. 3 years since she'd told me the apartment was too expensive for me alone, that I needed help, that she would manage the finances while I focused on my career. 3 years since I'd handed her my paycheck every month, watching her pay the rent to a landlord who didn't exist. I found the deed 6 months ago, accidentally, cleaning out her desk while she was at her bridge club, looking for a stamp, finding a folder, finding my name, finding the purchase price, finding the truth that had been sitting in a drawer while I ate ramen and she ate steak. I didn't confront her, not then, not when I found the forged lease agreement in her name, not when I discovered the rent I'd been paying went straight to her investment account, not when I realized she'd been charging me $2,400 a month for 3 years, $86,400 total, for an apartment she didn't own, that I owned, that she'd been living in rent-free while I worked double shifts at the hospital. I waited, patiently, the way you wait for test results, the way you wait for a fever to break, the way you wait for the right moment to destroy someone who thought they were destroying you. And now this, a dinner, a celebration. The words sat on the page like a challenge. I found David in his study, still in his suit from the morning's meetings, loosened tie, reading glasses pushed up into his silver-brown hair. He was 41, 12 years older than me, and he'd stopped pretending he wasn't going gray around the same time he'd stopped pretending he didn't watch me sleep. Your parents, I said, dropping the invitation onto his desk. He picked it up, read it twice, set it down with the careful precision he used for contracts he didn't trust. The Oak Room, he said. That's $400 a plate, minimum. And family celebration? I don't know what they're celebrating. My misery, probably. Or maybe Mom finally found someone else to leech off. David took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, the gesture that meant he was calculating risk, running scenarios, preparing for contingencies. You don't have to go. I know. But you're going to. I sat on the edge of his desk, the mahogany still smelling faintly of the lemon oil the housekeeper used. They've had 3 years to apologize, 3 years to pick up a phone, 3 years to explain why my own mother told her book club I was financially irresponsible, while she was pocketing my rent money. I laughed, but it came out wrong, too sharp, too practiced. You know what the worst part is? I still want them to show up. Some pathetic part of me still thinks if I just wear the right dress, say the right thing, they'll look at me and see their daughter again. Not an ATM. David stood, came around the desk, put his hands on my shoulders with the weight of someone who understood that some debts couldn't be paid with money. Then go. Wear the dress. Say the thing. His thumbs pressed into the tension at the base of my neck. But Maggie? Yeah? Don't pay for their validation. It's already bankrupt. I bought the dress on Thursday, not because I needed it. God knows David had filled our closet, no, my closet, in my apartment that my mother lived in, with enough designer labels to open a boutique. I bought it because I needed to choose something myself, something they hadn't approved, something that didn't exist in their frame of reference. Emerald green, silk that moved like water, backless to the waist, because my mother had once told me only women with something to prove showed their backs in public. I was 34. I had everything to prove. But standing in that dressing room, the silk cool against my skin, I wasn't thinking about my mother. I was thinking about another dress, another mirror. Another morning 3 years ago when I'd stood in a Queens department store, clutching a clearance rack gown, waiting for a phone call that never came. My mother had wanted to help me find an apartment. After my father's death, after the insurance money disappeared into investments I never saw, after I graduated nursing school with $80,000 in debt and a job at Mount Sinai that paid $58,000 a year. She'd found this place. A steal, she called it. Owner financed, no credit check, perfect for someone rebuilding. I'd signed papers I didn't understand, papers she explained to me, papers that, I now knew, made me the sole owner of a $1.2 million pre-war apartment in Jackson Heights. Papers that my mother had used to secure a $200,000 line of credit against the property. Papers that had my signature, but her intentions. For 3 years, I'd paid rent, $2,400 a month, handed to her in cash, because she preferred to handle the landlord directly. For 3 years, I'd eaten cafeteria food while she ordered from Whole Foods. For 3 years, I'd taken the subway while she used my emergency credit card for Uber Black. For 3 years, I'd believed her when she said I was bad with money, irresponsible, lucky to have her help. The deed changed everything, and changed nothing, because confronting her meant admitting I'd been a fool. Admitting I'd been a fool meant admitting my own mother had stolen from me. And admitting that meant admitting I had no one. So I waited. I planned. I saved every receipt, every bank statement, every text message where she mentioned the rent, or the landlord, or how lucky you are to have me. I opened a separate account. I consulted a lawyer. I prepared. And then the invitation came. The Oak Room, 20 people, a family celebration that I knew with the certainty of someone who had been trained to read vital signs was actually an execution. My mother had been dropping hints for weeks. At Sunday dinner, which I cooked, in my kitchen, with groceries I bought. At her bridge club, which I funded with the rent I paid. At her therapist, which I also funded because mental health is important, Maggie, and you wouldn't understand. You've never had real problems. The hints were about my cousin Patricia. Patricia, who had married a hedge fund manager. Patricia, who had a real job in finance. Patricia, who was pregnant with her second child and had already secured the baby's future with a trust fund. Patricia, who my mother compared me to constantly, always with the same sigh, the same head shake, the same, if only Maggie had applied herself. I knew what was coming. The public humiliation, the comparison, the reminder that I was a disappointment, a failure, a waste of the potential my mother had never actually believed I had. The performance she'd been rehearsing for 34 years finally reaching its climax. I was supposed to cry, to apologize, to promise to do better, to accept her help for another 3 years, another 6, another decade, until she died in my apartment and left me with her debts and her disappointment and the hollow certainty that I had never been enough. Instead, I bought a dress, and I prepared my documents, and I waited for the moment when the performance would reach its peak, when the audience would be fully engaged, when the spotlight would be brightest. Because the best time to destroy a narcissist is when they're convinced they've already won. The Oak Room occupied the penthouse of a building my father had tried to buy in 2008, back when he still had the capital to pretend he was a player in David's league. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over a city that had changed around him while he wasn't paying attention. Crystal chandeliers, waiters in jackets that cost more than my monthly salary from the job I'd kept even after David and I married, not because I needed the money, but because I needed the purpose, the identity, the proof that I was more than my mother's daughter. I arrived at 6:45, early because punctuality had been beaten into me with the same enthusiasm my mother had applied to piano lessons and posture correction. The maitre d' recognized my name, or rather, he recognized the Coulter name, the one that still opened doors in this city even as the fortune behind it dwindled like spring snow. "Your party is already seated, Mrs. Whitfield." Mrs. Whitfield, not Miss Coulter. The name change my parents had refused to acknowledge, spoken aloud by a stranger in a $5,000 jacket. The private room held 20 people. 20. My mother, my brother Thomas and his wife Jennifer, my Aunt Patricia and her latest husband, whose name I could never remember, cousins I hadn't seen since my grandmother's funeral, family friends who'd sent condolence cards when my father died, but hadn't bothered to check on me since. And at the head of the table, my mother. Eleanor Coulter, at 62, still carried herself like a woman who owned the room, even when she was renting it. Chanel suit, pearls that had been my grandmother's, the watch my father had given her for their 30th anniversary, the same watch she'd told me was lost when I'd asked to borrow it for my wedding. She stood when I entered, but not quickly, not eagerly, the way a queen stands when a subject enters the chamber. Margaret. Not Maggie. Never Maggie. You came. I was invited. Sit. We're about to begin. I counted the place settings, 20, plus the head table arrangement that suggested someone else was expected. David's chair, empty, name card removed, as if his absence had been planned from the first draft of the evening. "Where's David?" I asked, though I already knew. My mother answered, her voice the same crystal pitch she'd used at charity galas and junior league meetings for 40 years. "This is a family dinner, dear. We thought it best to keep things intimate." Intimate. 20 people, no husband. I sat. The emerald silk pooled around me like armor. The waiter poured wine I didn't ask for, and I let him, because I was going to need it. The first course arrived, some kind of foam on a plate, the kind of molecular gastronomy my mother pretended to understand, and the conversation flowed around me like I was a rock in a stream. Thomas talked about his promotion at the investment firm where my father had made calls on his behalf. Jennifer showed photos of their third child, the one born 3 months after my wedding, the christening my parents had flown to Colorado to attend, while my courthouse ceremony went unwatched. Aunt Patricia complained about her ex-husband's new girlfriend, who was 23 and, obviously after his money. I caught the eye of a cousin, Rebecca maybe, who looked away quickly, as if my disgrace might be contagious. The main course came. Wagyu beef, my mother's new favorite, the dish she'd discovered through her lifestyle consultant, a service I paid for through the rent I gave her, the rent that went nowhere except her pleasure. I cut into mine and found it overdone, gray where it should have been pink, and I wondered if the kitchen had made a mistake, or if this was simply what happened when you ordered status instead of sustenance. My mother waited until the plates were cleared, until the coffee arrived in cups so thin they were translucent, until every eye at the table was properly focused on the head of the family, the way they'd been trained since birth. She set down her napkin, folded it precisely, looked at me with the expression she'd once reserved for disappointing quarterly earnings, or, more accurately, for me. "Margaret," she said, "we're glad you came." "Are you?" The question slipped out before I could catch it. Too sharp, too honest. My mother's smile tightened until I thought her face might crack. "Of course we are," she continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "It's been 3 years, long enough for certain passions to cool. Long enough for perspective." "Perspective," I repeated. "Yes, perspective." She leaned forward, elbows on the table, the way she'd taught me never to do. "We were concerned, Margaret. You must understand that. You were 31, working double shifts at a hospital, and you married a man 12 years your senior with no prenuptial agreement. A man we'd never properly vetted. A man whose business practices are completely legal and extraordinarily successful," I finished. "And he's 12 years older, not 15. And I was 31, not a child. And you didn't express concern, Mom. You expressed contempt. You told your bridge club I was chasing security. You told Thomas not to come to my wedding. You—" My voice caught, and I hated myself for it. "You told me I was bad with money while you were pocketing my rent." The table went silent. Somewhere in the kitchen a plate broke. My mother's jaw tightened. "We were protecting you." "From what? From financial literacy?" "From yourself!" The words came out louder than she'd intended, and she paused, reassembled her composure like a woman rebuilding a face in a mirror. "From a mistake you were too naive to see. But that's in the past. You've been married 3 years now. Clearly the arrangement has proven durable." "Durable," I said, "like a tire or a contract." "Like a marriage," my Aunt Patricia interjected, her voice dripping with the particular venom of a woman who'd spent 35 years pretending her own marriages were anything but business arrangements. "And since this marriage has proven so durable, we thought it was time to address certain family obligations." I looked around the table, at Thomas, who was suddenly very interested in his wine, at Jennifer, who was texting under the table, at 20 faces I'd grown up with, eaten Thanksgiving with, endured Christmas Eve services with, and who had collectively decided that my happiness was less important than their comfort. "What obligations?" I asked. My mother smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "The apartment, Margaret." I blinked. "What about it?" "The rent, your contribution, has been inconsistent lately. And with the market what it is, your mother and I—" She caught herself, corrected. "I have expenses. The building needs repairs, the landlord is raising rates, and since you're married to a man of considerable means—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I understood, finally, what this dinner was. Not a reconciliation, not a celebration. An invoice. A performance designed to extract more money from the daughter they'd already bled dry, using the same weapon they'd always used: public shame. The waiter appeared at my elbow, silent as a ghost, holding a leather folder. He placed it in front of my mother with the delicacy of a man delivering a death sentence she expected me to pay. She opened it, glanced at the number, set it down with a satisfied smile. $4,237.56, she announced, loud enough for the table to hear. A small price for family unity, don't you think, Margaret? And since you're doing so well now, married, established, we thought you might cover this as a gesture of gratitude for everything I've done for you. Everything she'd done for me. The apartment she'd found, the rent she'd managed, the help she'd provided while draining my accounts, forging my signature, building a life on my labor. I stood. The emerald silk caught the light from the chandelier, and for a moment, I felt like I was glowing, like I was made of something incandescent and dangerous. "Waiter," I said. He materialized instantly, professional, unjudging, the way only service industry workers can be when they've seen everything and are still surprised. "Yes, madam?" "I'd like you to do something for me." I reached into my clutch, the clutch David had stuffed with emergency cash that morning, just in case, the way he always did, and pulled out not money, but a folder, thick, legal, the kind of folder that changes lives. "Of course." I turned to my mother, to the woman who had birthed me, raised me, taught me to doubt myself, and then exploited that doubt for 3 years of free housing and $86,400 in stolen rent. "Mom," I said, my voice steady, calm, the voice I used for difficult patients and breaking bad news. "You called me a failure tonight. You called me irresponsible. You told this table that I was bad with money, that I was lucky to have your help, that without you, I'd be nothing." "Margaret!" "Let me finish." I opened the folder, pulled out the first document, held it up for the table to see. "This is a deed, dated October 14th, 3 years ago. The property, 34-1288th Street, apartment 4B, Jackson Heights, New York." I let that sit, watched my mother's face shift from confusion to recognition to something that looked almost like fear. "Your apartment," I continued, "the one you found for me, the one you told me was owner-financed, the one I've been paying $2,400 a month to rent." I pulled out the second document. "This is the same deed, with the owner's name highlighted. Would you like to read it, Mom? Or should I?" I didn't wait for an answer. "Margaret Ann Coulter. That's me. I own the apartment. I have owned it for 3 years. I bought it with my signature, with my credit, with my future, while you told me I was too irresponsible to handle my own finances." The table was silent, absolutely silent. I could hear the ice melting in someone's glass, the distant hum of the kitchen, the sound of my own heart beating like a war drum. "And this?" I pulled out a third document, a spreadsheet, neatly organized, ruthlessly complete. "This is a record of every rent payment I've made to you. $2,400 a month for 36 months. Total, $86,400. Payments you told me went to the landlord. Payments that actually went to your personal investment account. Payments you used to fund this dinner, your bridge club, your lifestyle consultant, your therapist, all while I ate hospital cafeteria food and took the subway, and believed you when you said I was a failure. My mother's face had gone the color of old ash. Her hands, clasped around her wineglass, were shaking. "You're lying," she whispered. But her voice lacked conviction. It was the voice of someone who had been caught, who had known this moment was coming, who had hoped, prayed, that her daughter would remain too broken to ever challenge her. Am I? I pulled out one more document, a letter, on legal stationery. This is from my attorney. It outlines 2 options. Option 1, you repay the $86,400 in stolen rent, plus interest, plus the $200,000 you borrowed against my property without my knowledge. Total, approximately $312,000. Due within 90 days. I paused, let the numbers sink in, watched my brother's face shift from confusion to horror, watched my Aunt Patricia suddenly find her phone extremely interesting. Option 2, I continued, is simpler. You vacate my apartment within 30 days. You surrender all keys, all access, all claims. You never contact me again except through my attorney, and in exchange, I won't press criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and theft. I closed the folder, set it on the table in front of her, straightened my dress. I'll pay for my salad, I said, and a generous tip. Because unlike some people at this table, I believe in paying for services rendered. I picked up my wineglass. It was still half full, some expensive Bordeaux my mother had selected to impress people who weren't me. To family, I said. To the people who are there when it matters. And to the ones who aren't, may they find better things to do with their time than sending bills for betrayal. I drank, set down the glass, picked up my clutch. The rest of the check, I said to the waiter, to the room, to my mother whose face had gone from ash to something approaching grief, should be paid by the woman who called me a failure while living in my house. She owes me considerably more than $4,000, but I'll settle for her covering her own dinner. I walked to the door. 20 people watched me go, and not one of them spoke. Not even my mother, who'd spent my entire life having the last word. At the door, I paused, looked back. Thomas, I said, congratulations on the promotion. Mom must be proud. She certainly paid enough for it. Then I left. The elevator took forever. I watched the numbers descend, feeling the adrenaline drain out of me like water from a cracked glass, leaving me hollow and shaking and somehow more alive than I'd been in years. When the doors opened, David was standing in the lobby, not in the car, not waiting outside, standing in the marble lobby of a building his company owned, wearing the suit he'd worn to work, holding a single white rose, the kind I'd told him I hated, the kind my mother always sent, the kind that had arrived at my hospital locker every month with a card full of poisoned praise. I wasn't sure you'd need rescuing, he said, but I was sure you'd need someone who wasn't asking for anything. I walked into his arms. The silk of my dress whispered against his jacket, and I could feel his heart beating, steady and certain, the rhythm I'd learned to sleep to. They wanted me to pay, I said into his shoulder. $4,000 for a dinner I didn't want, with people who called me a failure because they thought my money, your money, made me obligated. Because they thought I was still the girl who believed them when they said I was worthless. He didn't say anything, just held me tighter. I showed them the deed, I whispered. I showed them the payments. I showed them that I've owned the apartment for 3 years while my mother called me irresponsible. I told her she has 30 days to get out or pay me $312,000. Good, he said. What did she say? Nothing. I pulled back, looked at him, at the man my parents had never bothered to meet, never wanted to understand, never thought was good enough because he hadn't asked their permission to love me. She said nothing. For the first time in my life, my mother had no words. He smiled, handed me the rose. Even though you hate these? Especially because I hate these. I took it, crushed the petals in my fist, let them fall to the marble floor like snow. Let's go home, David, to my apartment, the one I own, the one she's not invited to. We walked out together into a city that didn't care about my mother's approval or her bridge club or the 20 people still sitting in a penthouse staring at a check they hadn't expected to pay. And for the first time in 34 years, I didn't look back. The apartment was quiet when I unlocked the door. Not empty, not yet, but quieter than it had been in 3 years. The closet in the guest room, my mother's room, though she'd claimed the master bedroom because of her back, stood half open, revealing the chaos of a packing job half finished. Boxes labeled in her precise handwriting, kitchen, bedroom, memories. She'd chosen option 2. Of course she had. $312,000 was more than her remaining assets, more than she could borrow, more than she could hide. The lawyer had made that clear in the letter I'd had delivered the Monday after the dinner. Clear, cold, final. I walked through the living room, my living room, the space I'd paid for, that I'd never felt entitled to decorate because it was temporary, because I was lucky to have help, because my mother had made sure I never felt at home in my own home. The couch was new. I'd bought it last week after she'd started packing. A deep blue velvet that David had helped me carry up 3 flights of stairs because I refused to let movers into the space until she was gone. The walls were bare. I'd taken down her paintings, her photographs, her curated collection of family memories that featured everyone except me. In the kitchen, I opened the refrigerator. For 3 years, it had been stocked with her preferences. Organic vegetables I'd never eat, imported cheeses I couldn't pronounce, wine that cost more per bottle than my weekly grocery budget. Now it held my things. Yogurt, leftover Thai food, a carton of eggs. Simple. Mine. The sound of a key in the lock made me freeze. Not fear, anticipation. The final conversation I'd been rehearsing for 30 days. My mother entered slowly. She looked smaller than I remembered. Older. The pearls were gone, replaced by a simple chain. The Chanel suit packed away, replaced by jeans and a sweater that looked like something I might wear. "Margaret," she said. "Not Maggie. Never Maggie." "Mom, She stopped, looked around the apartment, at the bare walls, the new couch, the absence of her presence in every detail. "I wanted to say goodbye, properly, before the movers come tomorrow." "You said goodbye 3 years ago, when you decided I was a mark instead of a daughter." She flinched, actually flinched, as if I'd struck her. And maybe I had. Maybe words could be weapons when they carried the weight of truth. I was trying to protect you. You were so young, so naive. I didn't want you to make mistakes. So you made them for me? You stole my money, forged my name, told me I was worthless, and called it protection? I never said you were worthless. You said I was bad with money, that I was irresponsible, that I needed help every day for 3 years. While you lived in my apartment and spent my salary and told your friends how lucky I was to have you. I laughed, and this time it didn't come out broken. It came out free. Do you know what the worst part is? I believed you. I actually believed that I was the problem, that I was the failure, that without you, I'd be nothing. My mother sat down, heavily, on the new blue couch, the one she'd never approved of. She looked at her hands, at the rings she'd worn for 40 years, at the emptiness where my father's wedding band had been. I lost everything, she whispered. After your father died, the insurance, the investments, the life I'd built. I was scared. And you were doing so well. The nursing degree, the hospital job, the man with money. I thought if I could just hold on a little longer, if I could just use me, protect myself. She looked up, and for the first time I saw something in her eyes that looked almost like remorse. I'm 62, Margaret. I have no skills, no career, no husband. I was terrified of being homeless, of being nothing. So you made me nothing instead. The words hung in the air between us, heavy, final. The summary of 34 years of relationship distilled into a single sentence. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said finally. I don't deserve forgiveness. But I want you to know I'm proud of you. What you did, the dinner, the documents, the way you stood up to me. She laughed, a broken sound. My daughter, the one I called irresponsible, she outsmarted me completely. Don't, I said. Don't make this about my strength. Don't turn my survival into your redemption story. I didn't do this for you. I did it for me because I was tired of being small, tired of being scared, tired of believing that love meant letting someone destroy you. I walked to the door, opened it, held it for her. The movers come at 9, I said. Please be gone by then. And Mom? She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. Don't call me Margaret. You lost that right too. My name is Maggie, and the only people who get to use it are the ones who never tried to make me smaller. She stood, walked to the door, paused in the threshold, the way I had at the Oak Room, the way daughters learn from mothers even when they're trying to unlearn everything else. Goodbye, Maggie, she said, and then she was gone. I closed the door, locked it, leaned against the wood and listened to the silence of my apartment, my home, my life. David's key turned in the lock 10 minutes later. He entered carefully, carrying Thai food and a bottle of wine that cost less than my mother's weekly flour budget. She's gone? He asked. She's gone. And you? I looked at him, at the man who had waited in lobbies and held roses and never once asked me to be smaller than I was. At the life we'd built, that I was still building, that no one could take because I had finally learned to hold it. I'm here, I said. Finally. Completely. Here. He set down the food, opened the wine, poured 2 glasses and handed me one. To new beginnings, he said. To truth, I corrected, even when it costs everything. We drank, and for the first time in 34 years, the wine tasted like freedom.